And that's why I'm so excited to have Laura on the call today, because I consider her one of my mentors. Maybe we both mentor each other a little bit.
Yes.
Um, but there's so much to say about you. But Laura is a clinical professor and senior assistant dean of academic operations at the University of Colorado College of Nursing. Since becoming an acute care nurse practitioner in 2006, Laura has been increasingly involved with advocacy and policy for the nursing profession. She served on the board of the Colorado Nurses Association for 10 years in the roles of region director, vice president, president-elect, and president. She was also the American Association of Nurse Practitioners Colorado State Rep from 2018 to 2020. She's been active in providing testimony regarding nurse practitioner prescriptive authority at the state level, and enjoys meeting with legislators on both sides of the state and federal levels regarding full scope of practice and nurse safely. And oh my gosh, there's so much more to say, but whatever you care to share, please do. In the meantime, I am going to have you share your slides. I'm going to turn off my video to save some bandwidth. And just as an FYI, everyone, you did notice that this is being recorded when you joined. If you've seen our videos before, you will see that we only share the presentation part of this recording. We will not share anything of the conversation that we hold after. So we will continue to maintain that safe and brave space. Thank you so much for being here. Take it away, Laura.
Thank you so much, Grace. I'm actually really honored to be here. I think this is really exciting. And when we first, chatted a little bit about it, I was, kind of a little nervous. And now I'm like, you know what? This is really cool. I'm excited about it. It's something, like I said, I've got my coffee. It's like we're sitting in the cafe together. And even though I have slides, most people don't bring slides to the cafe, but really, it is just, I would love it to be a discussion or questions. Please feel free to jump in. I am going to have a couple little exercises for us to engage in. And I think they're going to be really helpful. They were helpful to me. I've done them before. So please feel free at any time to either raise your hand or come off mute or put something in the chat. I see people are already introducing themselves. A little bit in the chat, so that's great. As Grace said, yes, I have been involved in advocacy and policy for quite some time now, and I'll talk a little bit about that and how actually at the beginning I felt like, well, this isn't part of my job. And I think a lot of nurses feel like that, or they're intimidated. So when I really talk about this stuff, where I'm asked to speak about some of these things, it really is just about, some tips, some things, and stories are really powerful. So we'll talk a little bit about that today. So a couple of things. I think that in order to be an advocate or to engage in policy, what's something that's really powerful about that is knowing your why. Why are you doing this? Why are you a nurse? Why are you interested in this issue? Some of those things. So we're going to talk a little bit about that today, and then definitely how that feeds into telling some of your stories and how those can be really powerful when you're talking to your legislators. Or anyone that will listen, actually. So I always like to do a little check-in. We did some introductions, which I think is great. So now I know who's on the call, who I'm talking to. But I always like to also do a check-in of like where you feel you are right now. And when I say that, I mean, personally or professionally, are you down at the zero? Is your cup just empty? Are you completely burned out? Or are you, in the full area where you just feel really refreshed and feel like you're ready to go out there and continue to work? Or like many of us, maybe somewhere in the middle, feeling like, okay, there's some stress, but I think, I'm feeling positive about nursing in the future. And you can go ahead and throw that in the chat. I see some chat stuff coming up here. Or if you want to, tell me where you are. Everyone's deep in thought.
I'm sorry, I'm eating lunch. I'm off camera. So Linda Konisek, Frisco, Texas. I run a nursing research company. I just put this in the chat. And I found I did trauma and emergency medicine for 15 years. then went to work in the technology sector and really found my footing where I felt most comfortable as a nurse, doing the translation between healthcare technology and their buyers at healthcare systems.
Nice. Thanks for joining us during your lunch, Linda.
I'll promise not to too loud.
Okay, so I'm seeing, some really good positive stuff, right? 100%, 80-ish, 70, 90, that's great. It is. It's things like this when I get, I'm doing multiple roles in my job right now at the college, and it's stuff like this. And we're talking about, so we're talking about workload, and then we're talking about how you feel. So I feel like we're all at 100. And when we talk about the amount of work we're doing, we're probably at 110%. But this is something, engaging in things like this is what really keeps my cup full. And so I'm so glad to see everyone here and see that people are doing pretty well. I'm going to start out with a couple of quotes here, and I want you to think about these. And I want to just ask you if you feel like you agree with some of these things, and if you feel like it's kind of in the state of where we're at now in nursing. So one of the first ones is, it's important that nurses begin to think about other dissatisfactions that have continuously distressed the nurse practitioner. And when they say this, they're not meaning really the NP, they're meaning the practicing nurse or the RN. These are namely staffing, hours of duty, too large assignments, not allowing the practitioner to practice the kind of nurse care she has been taught, and the dilution of nursing services by substandard personnel. The other one over here is, it is important that we evaluate the results of our activities thus far and examine where we can go from here in order to achieve satisfaction in performance of nursing care and a feeling of commitment to the profession of nursing. How do those quotes resonate with you? Do you feel like that's where we are at right now with the nursing profession? Do you think that anyone has any other thoughts or things that you feel different about when you look at these? Yes, I'm seeing in the chat, we need all nurses to have influence despite formal authority. Completely agree. That's why we're here. Okay, so what's actually interesting about these two quotes is that they are from 1967. So this is an issue. I actually had this physical issue. It's a issue of the Colorado Nurse. So part of the Colorado Nurses Association. We've been publishing for a while now. And those quotes came out of this. So why am I sharing this with you? That was 57 years ago. And so why am I sharing this with you? I'm going to make a point that Michael was talking about a little bit earlier when we were having a little bit of dialogue and chat, that I'm not sharing this to discourage you, meaning nothing has changed since 1967. We've had a great amount of change. But again, as Michael said, as nurses, we have not historically been largely engaged in advocacy and policy work. Advocacy, yes, a lot more than definitely policy, and there are differences between those. But really, you look in the literature, and I'm actually writing a book chapter right now for a policy text. It's going to be in their 4th edition now. I was asked to write a chapter, and it really is about engagement. And I've been really kind of searching that literature. And when you look at things like the, systematic reviews and the historical involvement of nurses in policy, we are largely not at the table. We're not engaged. And when you look at the barriers or the things that, we think like, well, why aren't nurses doing this? One of them, it has been noted to be time, right? Somebody just in the chat said, I'm at 110%. I am working, right? So time has been seen as somewhat of a barrier. a feeling of powerlessness, right? And I'm just a nurse, right? And so that's in the title of this. I'm just a nurse. I don't have the power to make change, or whatever I say doesn't make a difference. It's not going to change, right? So you're never just a nurse, but that is seen, can be seen as one of the barriers. Sorry, I'm looking in the chat here. Yes. So Cassandra, I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly, says knowledge. Exactly. Right. We feel like we don't have the knowledge about these things, right? I don't know about, the ways the government work. I feel intimidated in talking to a legislator. I'm not sure about how I get involved, in some of these things. That is definitely one of the biggest noted barriers, right? And then resources, I think that goes along with it as well. And so resources like this. So Michael and Grace were saying, this is why this forum, which I'm so thankful for, this cafe has been created, because we want to share resources. We want to be able to say, hey, you know what, how can I do this? How can I go there? What are some of the things that I can look into, right? So really, imagine this. So I'm going to give you a little bit of an example here. Imagine if all of our nurses became involved in some manner, right? So we actually have 5.7 million nurses, so RNs and LPNs in this country right now, 5.7 million of us. Okay, now think about that in comparison to physicians. There's about 1.5 million physicians, and about 500,000 of them aren't actively even practicing this, just they hold a license, okay? And historically, when you look at involvement, and physician groups are very powerful. They're very powerful. And you think about that and you're like, why are they so powerful? There aren't even that many of them. So I did a little looking, and if you look at the AMA, or the American Medical Association, and that's just one medical association, they have about almost 300,000 members. Okay. Now, if you look at ANA, American Nurses Association, we only have not even 200,000 members. So if you think about that in perspective, about 20% of the physicians are a member of that organization of AMA. And when you look at ANA and the amount of nurses, we have about 4% involvement. So think about that. I will talk about, again, joining organizations. I think that's very powerful. I think there's so many nurses out there that think that, why should I pay, I don't know, whatever it is, $300 for a yearly membership to something, and I get a journal. And that's really not what you're paying for. You're paying for, I will tell you, the largest part of the Colorado Nurses Association dues go to our lobbyists. They go to people that go to the Capitol and speak for us. And so I think that's something that we really need to get out there and say, why, yes, there's barriers out there, but I think one of the things, if we can really try and get everybody involved, we can be so much more powerful when you think about that. My journey, I'll talk a little bit about that. So when I graduated from nursing school at the University of Michigan back in 2000. So it's been quite a while. And I came out, and, when you think about nursing school, and you think about, even if you're maybe going to advanced practice or something like that, you're really focused, I think, generally on not killing anybody, right? You're really focused on, what drugs am I going to, dispense? And what about the pathophysiology of this disease? And I have to take care of 5 or 6 patients. How can I do this without harming anybody? You're really not generally focused, even though everyone has a roles or a policy class generally, you're really not focused on that aspect. You just, you need to get out there and, like, how am I going to take care of patients? So policy really is kind of in the background, I think, of, a lot of nurses' minds. And it was with mine when I graduated. And my first job was actually in Michigan, and because, the auto industry is a very unionized state. And so my first job, they said, you will be a member of the union, or you're going to take that money and you're going to put it towards, like a charity or something. And for a while, I was kind of angry about that. And I said, you're going to take my money, you're going to make me spend my money, either way. right? And so what I did was I said, well, I might as well be represented. So I did. I put my money towards the union. And I am not here to talk about unions. That is a whole separate thing. But really, I'm just trying to say, like, when I got in there, I was like, this isn't my job. This is not what I'm supposed to do. I was actually very adverse to politics, which is very different or somewhat different than policy. And I really didn't become engaged or involved in anything until probably when I got my advanced practice certification and came to Colorado and started to practice. And what I realized at that time, that was probably 6 or 7 years into my nursing career, that there were some very interesting rules and laws in the Nurse Practice Act surrounding prescriptive authority. And so when I started nursing as an advanced practice nurse in acute care NP in Colorado, I actually had to have 3,600 hours of provisional authority, meaning under the mentorship of either another advanced practice nurse or a physician. And at that time, I was one of the only acute care NPs around in the hospital. And so my mentor was a physician during that time. 3,600 hours is like almost a year of having a mentorship. And there's actually no proof out there that any kind of mentorship is needed for advanced practice nurses to prescribe safely and to provide quality care. So I started to get involved in this and I thought, why is this happening? Why are we doing this? Oops, sorry, I just hit my thing there. Why are we doing this? And we eventually, over time, when I say we, nurses, CNA, went and testified about this. And we've got it down now to, it's a very arbitrary number, but 750 hours. So we are slowly chipping away at that, but we went from 1,800 hours to 1,000 hours to 750. And it's because people like me and nurses have been involved at that level. And I realized that it started to really make a difference in, my practice, my job as a nurse. And not only that, but patients, specifically patients, and taking care of patients. And then, at that point, after a couple of years in practice, I decided to become a faculty member. So I was at that time, I think some people had heard me testify or something. And so they said, why don't you run for the board? Why don't you go, to CNA? And at that point, I was still like, I don't know. And I thought, well, I need to be promoted at some point, to associate professor and then professor. And that looks really good. So, hey, why not? And I really, really ended up as Grace said 10 years, and finally as the president of the Colorado Nurses Association. And I've been out of that role now for a year, so I'm the immediate past president, but really realizing the support that I had, learning about these things, the issues, but also realizing that I don't have to be an expert in, what my legislators do. I don't have to be an expert in how a, bill becomes, a law. I just need to be an expert in my practice and then share that with those people who are writing those bills and making those laws. And because of that, and getting more involved, as Grace said, AANP, so the American Association of Nurse Practitioners, I decided to run for the state representative to the state of Colorado. And with that, got, up even out of the state level, but up to the federal level, and really just learning a little bit more about that. And the really cool thing that came about that is because of the passion and because of the support that I had through AANP, the Office of Public Engagement, through the vice president at that time, or still, Kamala, they reached out to AANP and said, we want to know about what's going on in all of the states with healthcare. And so AANP actually recommended me as one of their resources. And so I got to be on some really cool meetings that were hosted by the Office of Public Engagement at the White House. And then I was invited to actually go to the White House. Now, I didn't get to meet anyone of significance there, but it was really, really cool to actually be there and to meet some of the colleagues who were doing some of that work across the country. So it was really cool as you start to just really show your passion. And some of that is, again, being brave enough to say, I'm not just a nurse, right? I'm a nurse, not just a nurse, but I am a nurse. And I'm proud of my profession, and I'm proud of taking care of patients. And I'm an expert in my job and what I do. So with that, I'm going to show you a video. This is a video that was shared with me a few years ago, and it's always been very powerful to me. And so when we talk about how we do these things and how we engage with our legislators or engage with the public or people that are at the table making decisions, and we should be at the table making decisions, I think some of the background behind that has to be your why. And so we'll do a little exercise after this because I've done it and it really was helpful to me. But this video I found pretty powerful, again, talking about not just your what, so what you do, but your why, and getting you to think about that so that when you do go to tell your stories, this kind of passion is kind of in your background. So this is a couple-minute video. I hope you enjoy it as much as I do.
How do I know? A lot of people, when they think of the phrase, how do I know, they always want to put the what behind it. How do I know what I'm supposed to do? The question that you really should ask is, how do I know why I'm here? Because when you know your why, your what becomes more clear and more impactful. If you know, like for instance, people know that I do comedy, but that's what I do. My why is to inspire people to walk in purpose. So I can do comedy, I can write books, I can be in a movie, because all of it is motivated by my why. In fact, I have a new web series out called Michael Jr. Break Time. We probably just did the 6th episode. It's on YouTube. So every single Wednesday at 3 o'clock, we drop a new episode on YouTube of Michael Jr. Break Time. What it is it's me. I travel around the country and I do stand-up comedy, in case you didn't know. And in the middle of my comedy set sometime, I'll stop and just talk to my audience. And we've been filming this, and it's pretty cool. So we're in Winston-Salem. I'm gonna show you a clip from Winston-Salem. And I'm just talking to this guy in the audience, and he tells me that he's a musical instructor at a school. So I was like, all right, you're a musical instructor, can you sing? Let me hear you sing a song. So this is what happened at the last episode of Michael Jr.'s Break Time. Check it. So you're a musical director?
Yes, sir.
All right, so let me get a couple bars of like Amazing Grace. Can you do the first part of that? Go ahead.
Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me.
Wow. That bro could sing. You know what I'm saying? All right. Now, what you give me the version is if your uncle just got out of jail, you got shot in the back when you was a kid. I'm just saying, let me see the hood version real quick, if you know which version I'm talking about. Just see if that exists. Let me see what you got.
Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. Time goes by, but now I see. Okay, here's what I want you to catch. The first time I asked him to sing, he knew what he was doing. The second time, he knew why he was doing it. When you know your why, your what becomes more impactful because you're walking towards or in your purpose.
So thank you for watching that. Again, I think it's really powerful when you think about, and I need to just get off this screen here. When you think about, your why and how really, if you are able to hone into that, and it becomes your truth, how you can be very powerful when you're sharing, some of your stories. So with that, I would just like to take maybe about 5 minutes. I've done this exercise before. I think it's really great. It's just for you. So if you have a piece of paper or your tablet or whatever you want to grab, it's going to be just you reflecting on some of these questions. And you can see down at the bottom. So this is from AACN. I did this exercise in ELAN. ELAN is a fellowship in leadership in academic nursing. And we did this back in 2021, and I still use this to this day. So if you would take about 5 minutes or so and just, you can stay off camera, do some reflection on this, but think about some of these questions. So, and you can write it down kind of like a brainstorm. So what or who are the significant events, activities, or people that have had an influence on you? What do the jobs or careers that you've had have in common? What are your values and beliefs? What do you choose to stand up for, advocate, or protect? And what makes you happy, pleased, and proud? So I'm just going to set a little timer just for a few minutes. Go ahead and really think about those questions. We'll leave them up here and go ahead and just brainstorm and write some of those down. And then we will take the next step in just a few minutes. All right, we'll give it about 1 more minute. Wrap up your thoughts. Okay. It's funny, as we were sitting here, I just got a text that says that Governor Polis is voting yes on 131. It's that time of year for the elections. Okay. Now it's going to get a little bit harder. We're going to take what you just wrote down and you're going to summarize it into 50 words or less and then narrow it down to 1 sentence. Now, here's some actual whys that people have written in real life. So to live a happy life and to be surrounded by people whose lives I have positive influence on, to help people be more connected in their life, career, and business, to make my children and family proud, and to share the power of therapeutic humor with others. So if you can, I'm going to give you a couple more minutes, take everything you wrote down, try and narrow it down to 50 words or less, and then get it down to 1 sentence that means something to you. Okay, I'm going to give you about 1 more minute on that. Okay, now if you aren't finished and you want to work on that later, Absolutely. Did anyone come up with anything that they would like to share? You don't have to. I'll share mine with you that I ended up with. Mine was the well-being and life purpose of all people matter. That's what I came up with. It's very general. So sometimes these will really help you focus. This one was really general, but what I reflected on is that it actually made me think about going more globally and getting involved. I did some teaching in Taiwan. I do some teaching for nurse practitioners in Haiti, not in person, unfortunately. The environment is awful down there, but online. It allowed me to meet Grace when I decided to get involved with Project Cure and doing some global work there. So let's see, we've got one in the chat: to empower nurses everywhere, every day, to lead advocacy for each other and communities to live sustainably in a world of justice. Wow, that makes mine seem a little trite. Anyone else come up with anything they'd like to share? I can't, someone says, so Danielle says to empower nursing students to excel personally, professionally, and enhance the well-being of others. That is awesome. To help victims yes, I remember you talking about that, Nina, that's amazing. So I can't to 50-word only, haha. Yes, it's tough, right? So if you were not able to narrow it down to 50 words in that time and then down to a sentence, take some time in the next, day or two, or when you have some time to reflect, and you can finish the exercise. I didn't want it to go on forever and ever. The work that I do is meaningful to me and provides significant value to my clients. These are amazing. I love this exercise because when I hear these, it's really inspiring to me. Really cool. Thank you for participating in that. All right, so onwards, title of the talk was talking about stories. So let's talk a little bit about them and how they can be powerful and how they can actually make nurses more confident in doing and engaging in advocacy and policy. So if you think about it, if you tell a story, right, no one can say that's not the truth or that's wrong, right? It's your story. It's something that happened to you, to one of your patients, and they can be pretty powerful. So the background behind stories is that we're hardwired in our brains to tell them. Back when there wasn't the written word, there wasn't anything that was written or published in language. It was about survival and groups of people. You survived in a group, right? More power with a group of people in order to survive. And how those survival techniques and those group experiences were passed down was through stories, right? It was the written word. And so, or I'm sorry, the spoken word, not the written word. And so when we think about that, I mean, our brains were made to tell stories, and that's how history, originally was passed on. And in fact, when we look at functional MRIs of people when they are listening to stories and they're telling stories, there's activating multiple areas of the brain, including your motor cortex, your visual processing centers, your emotion centers, right? So we see brains actually light up when we're receiving stories. And actually what it does is interestingly enough, is it triggers the release of some chemicals, dopamine, one of our, reward chemicals, but that helps to keep us engaged, right? In what we're hearing. It also, interestingly enough, triggers the release of oxytocin. And when you think about that, it's actually an empathy and bonding hormone. And I thought, wow, maybe that's why oxytocin is released when women are having babies, right? It's that bonding hormone. So you really, it gauges that kind of empathy, and really helps you to think about, that other person's story. It releases cortisol. Of course, we know that's our kind of our stress hormone, but really it helps us to process memories and to hold on to those memories. So there's a lot of things going on when we're, sitting around the campfire here and telling stories. And in fact, what's really interesting, so Yuri Hassan, who is a neurobiologist who's done a lot of work, if you Google a lot of these things about storytelling, a lot of people are actually coaches, which I found really interesting. So we actually pay people to coach us on telling stories, which I found fascinating. But he is a neurobiologist and has done a lot of work with this. And actually, there is something that occurs called neurocoupling or mirroring. And so when we are listening to a story that someone is telling us, our brain waves actually start to sync together. Really fascinating stuff. Also giving us a sense of belonging and community. So really there is actually scientific power behind stories. And the other piece about that is that they've noticed that it actually helps spread. So if you are really trying to spread a message, when you were telling us, Yuri, what was his name? Yuri, Uri Hassan, I think, Hasson, neurobiologist. I think he's out of, I don't know, Princeton or Harvard or one of those on the East Coast. But really, it helps to produce spread of your message. So when somebody hears a story, and think about it when you hear a story, and it's kind of fascinating, you go, you process it, you think about it for a while, right? Not like a fact, like, oh, 50% of nurses are this or that, right? It's if you hear a story, then you also go and tell someone about it, right? Someone told me a story today about this lady that was, I'm going to tell you a story actually about a lady that was crawling on the floor of the emergency department, right? You think about that, you process that, and you go, God, do you know that somebody told me this story today? So it actually helps spread a message. Now, this is interesting. I was talking with someone, she's a researcher, a nurse researcher out of Toronto, Canada. And she made some really interesting comments to me the other day, which I found that I was trying to process. And she said, yeah, but what about facts, right? Like, facts are powerful. And, if we as a nursing profession maybe haven't excelled enough in policy or in, the profession because we haven't had the evidence. We haven't produced the evidence, right? And I thought that's pretty powerful, right? But at the same time, I thought, okay, yes, facts are actually can be very powerful, but they're also very easily delivered. So if you have, and I think what was put in the chat earlier about, Michael said something about the staff, right? So not even talking, half the time you can't talk to your legislators, you talk to their staff, and they are amazing. The staff is amazing. And so if you have 10 minutes, that's probably about what you'll get because they're very busy, at least at the federal level, 10 minutes with a staff member. What do you want to use that 10 minutes on? So really you can take the facts and you can say, 50% of nurses, don't feel safe in the workplace, or, we have so many people leaving the profession, or there's going to be a shortage, or those types of things. You can easily type those up, put them on a piece of paper, put them in a folder with, your business card or your information and say, here is the information, but I'm going to take my 10 minutes and tell you a story. So now they get both, right? And you're not wasting time on stuff that they're not going to remember. And if they ask you a question that you don't know the answer to, you say, I am more than happy to email you, look that up. I know I don't have the answer to that question, but I'll email it to you. And they're great with that, right? You don't have to have all the answers, but really take that time, that valuable time. You can pass them the facts in a written word or in an email, but take that time. You can't, very effectively tell a story by email or in a folder, right? So take that time to tell that story. All right, so moving along here. Okay, I'm going to give you an example of this. So you could say, and this is, kind of a story, but I'm going to give you a little bit more of a background to kind of get you to pump up your stories a little bit. So you could say, you know what, I want to tell you the story about Mr. Smith. He was, this 80-year-old man. He had COVID, went into the hospital, and a nurse noticed that he wasn't doing that well. And it was that astute nurse who recognized, like, whoa, wait a second, a little bit early on the intervention, this guy isn't doing well. We need to escalate care. We need to advance that. And he ended up, because of that nurse and because of the great nursing care that he got, this was in Utah, actually, I believe, that he survived. This guy survived, and he was in the hospital for 200 days. Now, that's pretty powerful. You can think of it that way. Now, I want to show you a different way to illustrate this. Now, yes, this is a video. You can't always just, bring in a video to your legislative appointment. But I want to illustrate this because I want you to think about how you can really use the details. When you see this, it's going to give you a visceral reaction. And I want you to think about how you can use that reaction that you're going to experience to the story and put that into words when you're talking to somebody.
Are we supposed to be seeing something? Because I'm seeing you, Laura. Well,
Sorry, you said you're not seeing anything?
I'm not.
I'm seeing the video.
I see
I
a
am
man
not.
leaving a hospital.
Yeah, yeah.
I do not see anything like that.
Oh, well, some of us see it, some of us don't.
I'm
Can
sorry.
you hear it?
No, I can't hear it either. I heard Kenny Loggins singing "We Celebrate Me Home."
Yes, yes. So there's the visual is this man that I just told you about, the 80-year-old man. He's actually leaving the hospital after 200 days, and there's a group of and so this is how you can tell a story, right? And there's a group of healthcare workers, largely a lot of nurses, that are standing there and clapping for him as he is able to leave the hospital after 200 days. And Julie says the video is a bit glitchy. So this is my last video, so I'm glad. But what I'm trying to illustrate here for you is that in looking at something like this, you can say, oh, this man left the hospital and we need more nurses. And if we didn't have nurses that he maybe would have not survived. But then you can think about how looking at this or maybe hearing it, Linda, of illustrations of how you can really use some of that that visual to create a little bit more detail in your stories. Now, you can send videos to your legislators or their staff. That is another way to do this, but just getting you to think about really trying to, when you're telling a story, pulling people in, right? And again, this is your story. And then being visual about it, right? Those details. I'm going to tell you, and it doesn't even have to be your story. I'm going to tell you a story of one of my students told me that we have shared. We passed some really great legislation in Colorado on some state safe staffing. And one of these stories we told, and it was a story of an emergency department. My student is a nurse in this emergency department, very busy. And one evening, they were so short-staffed, say that 10 times fast. There was a trauma. He was actually hanging blood on one of his patients. And there was a trauma that was called. It was actually a young man who had a very serious gunshot and was in arrest. And he heard this and was in the room with his patient where he was hanging blood and not supposed to leave the patient when you're initially administering blood. And but he realized that there weren't any people around for this trauma. So he ran into the other room and he was administering CPR and working as people finally were coming into the trauma room. And at that point, he said, okay, there's enough people in here, we have it under control. And as he was going back to the patient that he shouldn't have left to begin with, he was looking down the hallway and there was a woman crawling on the floor, a patient crawling on the floor who had put her call light on and nobody was available, that she actually got out of her bed and was crawling down the hallway to get help. Now think about that when you're telling a story about safety and nurse staffing, right? The importance of why we need to support nurses so they feel empowered to go to work and work in those environments because it helps patients. All right, so I'm finishing up here. These are a couple of pictures of me. This one on the right was me at the White House. As I said, I got to visit. It was really, really cool. You can do that as well. This picture right here in the center, that's Governor Polis there. So when the pandemic hit, this was May of 2020, and it was Nurses Week. And so they asked me to come and speak. I spoke at his press conference there, and you can see me in the background. And I spoke about early in those stages about the importance of wearing masks. And just imploring the public as our hospitals were being flooded with people to try and take care of people. So that was me. The reason I'm putting up these pictures is, again, just to remind you that I started out and I was like, there's no way I'm going to do any of that kind of stuff. And now it's something that I'm very passionate about, and it really fills my cup. And so really to encourage people to get involved. And sometimes that's the first and hardest step, is people are like, I don't know how to get involved. Look at your state nurses associations, some grassroots efforts. We actually, when I was in the presidency, we created something called ANTS, which was the advocacy. No, I'm sorry. The advisory and networking teams, ANTS. And there were 4 groups that we created, and they're really grassroots. We surveyed our membership at CNA, and we said, what are you interested in? And so 4 groups came out of that. One was education, one was workplace safety, one was research, nursing research, and one was rural health. We've got, people think about Colorado and they think Denver, but really most of Colorado is very, very rural. And so those rural health, and people and members who have not been involved before find a passion, and they have come and they have meetings, and they actually, that's funny. I'm looking at the chat. Talk about the power of the small individual to make big impact. Yes, ants, little teeny ants. But really they've come together, and then what they do is they make recommendations to the larger board of CNA and our GAP committee, which is our Government Affairs and Public Policy Committee, about issues that matter. So even just getting down into those grassroots and starting, at that level. And then I always like to talk about the power of associations. Again, people think, well, why should I dedicate my, money to this? I get a journal and that's it. And it's really not true. Again, so much of the money in some of those very powerful organizations goes to our lobbyists, goes to people who are at the table, who are lawyers, who are lobbyists, who are people that fight for us at our capitals and at the national capital every day. And just think about the power of that when I talked about the numbers, right? If we could get so many more nurses to join, it's so, it can be so powerful. We can get our voice to be heard. And just thinking also about kind of stopping again that I'm just a nurse mentality. I can't tell you how many times I've heard, well, I'm just a nurse. And it's like, oh, it's so frustrating. Don't say that. You are a nurse, right? And then just wrapping up, you are the expert. You are the expert in your profession. And it's really in a recent journal article, there was an interview of the Pennsylvania state representative. His name is Tariq Khan. He's an FNP. And he is a legislator there, a state representative. And he described the legislator's job as to create laws and represent constituents' concerns at the state level. They are not the expert in nursing. They're not the expert in healthcare. Now he is, because he's an FNP. But for the rest of them, they lean on you to tell them about the issues, to fill them in on the facts and the stories and the problems, right? They don't know. So they want you, and you are the expert to do that. You know about your profession, you know about your job, you know about nurses and patients. And so really, you don't have to know everything about everything. You know about what you were talking about as a nurse, okay? You don't even have to, know everything about what goes on in the legislature. And I think that's where people get really intimidated, right? So you're really, and in your legislature, the people in the legislature, your legislators, are human beings just like you. They're citizens of, your environment. Okay, so they recognize that you have the expertise on that. So with that, this is me in the in the White House. I will open it up to any kind of dialogue, any questions. Please, that's my email. Feel free to email me. And I really want to, I'm going to stop my share. Thank you for being here. I'm really happy to have talked with you today.
I love that photo.
Yeah, it's a little crazy. I was like, I'm here in the White House. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Laura. I think that was a beautiful, definitely like academic perspective of a step-by-step process, but really, really good way to describe, what does it take for us to realize that our lived experience is enough, more than enough? Sometimes, when we think about, Julie, I saw your comment about early career, early educated nurses, like the pre-licensure level, we vision ourselves in this very like step-by-step orderly process. There's one way to become a nurse or multiple paths, but it's a linear direction to licensure. And you choose, okay, what specialty are you going into? And this is how I do it. Okay, I want to get into management. This is how you climb the ladder. But not everything is hierarchical like that. And as nurses in civil society, away from traditional or bedside care roles, it's not like that. And that's great, but it's also so difficult because there's no one guiding us on how to do that. We have to guide each other through our lived experiences, and that is enough. We don't have to wait for someone to give us the title to say we have the authority, or we don't have to be. There's a reason it's called a jack of all trades or a master of none. Like, you can't be an expert in everything. You have to show how your expertise can inform other lenses and other experiences and health and all policy. That's the way I take it. So thank you so much, Laura. I want to open it up to anybody else who might have a question. Let's start this robust dialogue.
And yes, thank you for your comments in the chat. Oh, I heard somebody. No?
Maybe I can ask Laura, pointing to the question about the professional organizations or early career nurses, pre-licensure education. What I have found personally is that I have been a part of and paid for several professional organizations. And I can appreciate that those dues might go to the lobbying that you speak of. But if I want to get involved, I have not found that it's an easy pathway. On the information on the websites, there's no like, oh, you want to get involved? Or how do you take action? Oh, just submit more money. It's like, okay, but what if I want to do the action? What if I have something to say? What do I do?
Yeah. Yeah, that's a really good point. Like if you were to go to ANA and on the website and take a look, or I was looking at one the other day that I was asked maybe a year or two ago to speak at AACN, the critical care, not the educational stuff, but the, Association of Critical Care Nurses. And so I was looking on their website, and there's plenty of these little buttons that are like, hey, here's your resources. But there really isn't anything like, this is how to directly get involved. This is what you do. That's a really good point. I have not seen that. And I think it really is, I think that's part of the issue, is that we really need to be self-directed and to really dig and find those. And in fact, so I did an editorial piece for the Critical Care Journal, and I actually reached out to one of the legislators who's a nurse in North Carolina, and one of her phrases, I think, in the piece she wrote was, no one is going to do it for us. Like if we want to be at the table, it's like our job to figure it out. And yes, I would completely agree with you that that's probably one of the barriers as well, is like, I have no idea how to even like get involved in there. And I guess my suggestion for that is really to just start getting in there and Googling, right? Like, I know it sounds so rudimentary, but at the same time, it's like, what is around me? What can I, get involved in? Are there people that, are interested in the same things, or even in your workplace, maybe, right? Saying, hey, well, I'm interested in that. Have you, before you go to those kind of larger scale organizations. Yeah.
For
I don't know.
example, you mentioned that you were encouraged once you got into academia to run, to get involved that way. Who was it that extended their hand and said, let me show you the way. Let me get you that first step in the door?
The executive director, actually, of the Colorado Nurses Association, who recently stepped down. She was in for years. And I think we got connected because of my testimony at the Capitol on prescriptive authority. And she was connected. I think she was a recent graduate also, I think, at the college. And so was a little bit connected there. But yes, she was the one. And, that's not often common either, right? The executive director of, or the president of, or whoever says, why don't you think about, running for office? Yes, her name is Colleen Casper. She's amazing. Yes. And what's funny about that is a couple of people who are running that used to be faculty members with me at the college. So Peggy Jenkins, who is now down at Arizona. And oh gosh, he left so long ago. He's retired now, I can't think of his name, but he used to be he was a faculty member with us briefly at CU, really, really looking at the value of nursing and reimbursement. Yeah, there's quite a few, not enough across the country. If you Google them, so one of them, as I just said, was out of Pennsylvania. He's a state representative there. Tarik, Tarik, Khan, Khan. We have a representative on our, he was actually a representative and he's now in the Senate, which is really cool. So yeah, there's nurses at both the federal and state levels that are on your representing you and on your legislature. You just need to Google them. There's, I want to say 6 federal I think. And then more, at the state level, but there are definitely nurses out there that are on your legislatures. Nurses on boards. That is an actual kind of organization now that is really working to help to get nurses on boards throughout the country. And we really need to think broadly about that, because I think also one of the barriers is like, oh, if we're going to be on a board, it's got to be a healthcare board. And it's like, I mean, healthcare is intertwined into everything that we do, right? So making those kind of neural connections on, okay, it's the, I don't know, USAA or whatever board. And you're like, well, that's an insurance company for military people. And it's like, yes, but there's health involved in your, in your military community. They need to have the perspective of a nurse. So when you think about those things, so nurses on boards, definitely is, one piece of that. And then you also mentioned those letters. So I've heard different things about those letters, and some people really say like, oh, if it's just a, templated letter that comes out of your organization and you just send it, press the button to send it to your legislator, like they're not going to look at it. I've actually talked to some of our legislators about those letters, like, hey, what do you think about those templated letters that just come out and they all look the same? And they said, actually, if we get a whole bunch of them, it actually alerts us to an issue that we need to look at. So even though people say like, oh, those letters don't mean anything, they actually do, because the volume indicates that there's something going on. So if they get 100 letters, and even though they're all the templated, same thing, they're going, well, wait a second, we got 100 letters coming in on this. So they actually do make a difference from what I've heard. As an educator, it's funny that, we were talking about this just, I don't know, about 2 weeks ago. We've been doing this back and forth. And when I say we, the Colorado Nurses Association, this has been going on for like 2 years, have been kind of negotiating with the Board of Nursing on this rulemaking on prescriptive authority. And they were doing some crazy stuff. And we're like, we don't want you to do that, right? And so what we ended up doing, I think I recorded this like 2 days ago. It really affects a lot of our FNP graduates. They're coming out and then they're having difficulty with getting employment because of some of these rules. And so I actually, I do not teach the role or policy class. So I made a video for them, for the students. And I said, this is how this is going to affect you when you graduate. Like, this is going to affect your ability to get a job. And I think, like what you said, is how do we make it meaningful to them, of like, not this overarching, like policy, let's go to the, Washington, DC, but really, how does this affect me? How does this affect my ability to work and to take care of patients? And starting at that, kind of making it tangible to them, right? Of saying like, it's not about going to, because it is. I think we don't approach it. I think we could approach it very differently. And I'm not sure that people know how to do that. That is often extremely frustrating for people who are trying to really make change, right? It's like, okay, we've been working on this bill for 2 sessions, right? We've been, chipping away at something. And it's like, if they don't see, and especially with the younger generations who are so used to, instant gratification, you just look up something on your phone, you do something and it changes. And with policy and legislation, it can take years to get something done, and keeping that motivation and having them be patient with that. I think that was a very thoughtful chat. I can give you actually a couple of names. I ran across them when I was looking at storytelling information. Let me see. I've got a few I can give you. Leo Widrich, Widrich. Lisa Crone, Cron. Kendall Haven, Haven, Kendall with 2 L's. Yeah, they're out there. I was actually quite interested in, yeah, there it's like you go there and they're like, I'm a coach to help you tell stories. Thank you so much for this opportunity. This is amazing to learn from everybody, to see all the different types of perspectives. And as you said, Grace, to spend, a Saturday morning / afternoon with people that are really passionate about this. So thank you for that.